When Houston Police Department faced a horrifying crime scene, they uncovered this haunting piece of surveillance footage. In it, a man can be seen strolling casually through the apartment lobby and stepping into the elevator, and 23 minutes later, he leaves the complex just as calmly as he arrived. But tracedly, within those 23 minutes, he had murdered Shelby Thornberg, a young woman only 20 years old. With this security video and other pieces of evidence, detectives believed it would be easy to identify her killer. Unfortunately, this was a meticulously planned and carefully executed operation. So who was Shelby Thornberg? Why did she become the target of such a killer? And will this murderer ever be brought to light? Shelby Thornberg, 20 years old, had once been a little girl, scarred by a broken childhood. But as she reached adulthood, she fought back against life itself, losing more than 100 pounds, regaining her confidence and starting anew in Houston, Texas. She had her own apartment, what looked like a steady relationship, and a future that finally seemed to fall at her. In Shelby's bright eyes, you could see the dream to become a model, to live as her true self. Yet in one November night in 2015, everything was taken away. The surveillance camera inside the Conquistador apartment complex captured a man entering the lobby. He wore a light-colored sweatshirt, shorts, sneakers, and most chilling of all, dark sunglasses at night. His demeanor was calm, almost casual, as though he had every right to be there. 22 minutes later, he walked out the very same doors. Still calm, still concealed. But upstairs in her apartment, Shelby lay lifeless, her throat slashed so deeply it reached her spine. A young woman with her whole future ahead of her had been erased in silence. And here is the most haunting part. Police had his face, his body, his movements on tape. But nearly 10 years later, the man has never faced justice. Who killed Shelby Thornberg? Why did he act with such calculated precision? And why, in a case that seemed so solvable, has the truth remained hidden in shadows? This is more than a murder. It is a chilling reminder that a killer can walk among us, vanishing into the night, as though he never existed. Before death claimed her, Shelby Thornberg had already lived a lifetime of struggle. She was born in 1995 in Wise County, Texas, a place of wide fields but little peace for her. Her father, Robert, spent years in prison on charges never fully disclosed. Her mother, Leslie, slipped into the grip of drugs. That left Shelby and her sister Christina as children adrift, shuttled from one foster home to another. Too often, the so-called safe houses became places of abuse and neglect. Those years left wounds that would never fully heal. Christina, the elder sister, slowly became more than just family. She became Shelby's protector, her stand-in mother, the only constant wall against a hostile world. They clung to each other like survivors in a storm, forging a bond no one could break. To Christina, Shelby was both her little sister and her reason to keep going. But trauma carved its mark on Shelby. Depression settled into her life early, and food became her refuge. By the end of her teenage years, she stood only 5 feet 1 inch tall, but weighed more than 300 pounds. To many, weight is only a number. But for Shelby, a young woman dreaming of becoming a model, it felt like an immovable wall between her and the life she wanted. Then came a turning point. Shelby made a decision that would redefine her. She began an unforgiving regimen of dieting, gym sessions, and endless cardio. She forced her body through exhaustion, determined to reclaim her identity. In less than 2 years, she lost over 100 pounds. It was a transformation so striking that people barely recognized her. Most importantly, her eyes lit up again. For the first time in years, Shelby believed she could truly build a new life. But a new path brought new obstacles. Rapid weight loss left her with excess skin, and for someone who wanted to model cosmetic surgery, was the only answer. The price tag, however, was thousands of dollars far beyond her means. It was in this fragile moment that Marcus Dwayne Johnson stepped in. At first, he seemed like a caring boyfriend. But beneath the surface, Marcus was something else entirely. He wasn't simply Shelby's partner, he was her pimp. He controlled her clients. Her schedule even helped pay for the apartment where she lived. That was the turning point that pulled Shelby into danger. Behind the walls of the Conquistador apartment complex, men arrived one after another, each with cash and expectations. Shelby had become a high-end escort working from the same place she called home. Her family didn't know. Friends wouldn't have believed it. And Shelby herself told Christina only in fragments, ashamed and afraid. But she felt trapped, caught between abandoning it all with nothing or continuing long enough to save for the surgery she hoped would change everything. She convinced herself it was only temporary. Yet anyone who knows this world understands once inside it rarely lets you walk away freely. Shelby was not weak. She was resilient, resourceful, painfully aware of the risks. But her tragedy lay in the fact that personal strength alone could not dismantle the systems of control and exploitation surrounding her. She had won the war against her own body, but the war against the world around her would prove far deadlier. On the night of November 4th, 2015, the trap finally closed. November 4th, 2015. The sky over Houston darkened quickly, as it often does in late autumn. For most of the city, it was an ordinary night. But for Shelby Thornberg, it would become the final chapter of her life. The evening began with a message at exactly 8 o'clock. A new client wrote, "I'll be there in 20 minutes." Shelby responded with her usual brevity, "Okay." At 8:33 he messaged again, "I'm here." And right on cue at 8:34 the surveillance camera of the Conquistador apartment complex caught him entering. He was a white male, wearing a light-colored sweatshirt, short sneakers, and dark sunglasses, oddly out of place at night. His demeanor was calm, unnervingly casual, as if he were just another tenant returning home. He sat for a brief moment in the lobby, scrolling through his phone, before appearing into the elevator that led directly to Shelby's apartment. 6 minutes later, at 8:40, Shelby sent Marcus a one-word text. "Good." It was their code, a signal that she felt safe with the client and that everything was proceeding normally. It would be the last word Marcus ever received from her. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere shifted. Whatever pretense of normalcy existed ended violently. Shelby was attacked with a knife. The blade cut across her neck, slicing through the jugular vein, severing the carotid artery, and digging deep into her spine. Death came quickly from massive blood loss, but not without resistance. Wounds on her hands, wrists, and shoulders revealed she had fought desperately to defend herself. She battled for her life, but the attack was relentless. Exactly 22 minutes after walking in, the man walked out. He wore the same clothes, his pace steady, almost rehearsed. But there was one striking detail throughout his exit. He kept his left hand buried in his pocket. Was he hiding a wound inflicted during the struggle, or concealing the weapon that had just ended Shelby's life? Either way, the gesture betrayed a tension beneath his otherwise calm exterior. The sunglasses still on his face at nearly 9 o'clock at night made his intentions clear. He did not want to be recognized. Meanwhile, Marcus grew uneasy. The silence from Shelby's phone was unusual. Hours later, his worry turned into dread. Shortly before midnight, he returned to the Conquistador apartment. Inside, he found the scene no one should ever have to witness: Shelby lying face down, unclothed on a small bed, pushed against the sofa. Her clothes lay scattered on the floor, The room reeked of blood-thick pools staining both the carpet and the walls. Police arrived to a tableau of calculated brutality. Yet what chilled detectives more than the violence was the absence of evidence. No fingerprints, no data aside from a trace sample that matched no database, no sign of forced entry. The killer had entered as a client and left as a ghost. This was not the work of an impulsive man. This was the work of someone who had planned meticulously. He carried a burner phone purchased with cash, used it solely to contact Shelby, and discarded it immediately afterward. The phone never lit up again. That night, the Conquistador apartment complex was not just a crime scene. It was a stage where a killer performed a carefully scripted play, entering as a stranger, exiting as a shadow. And Shelby, a young woman who had fought her entire life to overcome pain, was silenced into just 22 minutes. From the outset, suspicion fell on Marcus Dwayne Johnson. He was the man who controlled Shelby's work, the last one to receive a message from her, and a figure whose role in her life straddled the line between boyfriend and pimp. For investigators, it seemed logical. Men in Marcus's position often had motives: control, jealousy, money. But as hours of interrogation unfolded, the evidence didn't align. His alibi was airtight. He was in another location, backed by witnesses and corroborated by records. Whatever Marcus was, he was not the man on that surveillance tape. That left detectives staring at the only true lead: the footage from the Conquistador. The images were unnervingly clear for 2015. A white male, short-cropped hair, a solid build, casual clothing, and those dark sunglasses at night. They had his face, his posture, his gait. Yet when the police showed the footage around, no one recognized him. Not the residents of the building, not Marcus. And no matches surfaced in any state or national database. Behavioral analysts began to dissect his body language. The way he tilted his head downward as he walked through the lobby suggested shame or guilt. The left hand jammed firmly in his pocket hinted at either a hidden wound from Shelby's struggle or a weapon concealed in plain sight. His calm pace as he exited, rather than rushing, pointed to practiced control. This was no panicked amateur. He looked like a man who had done this before, or at least prepared extensively for it. The burner phone deepened that theory. He had purchased it with cash, used it exclusively to contact Shelby, and destroyed it immediately after the murder. No digital trail, no account details, no hope of tracing it back to a real name. That level of foresight suggested someone trained, perhaps with a background in law enforcement, the military, or something darker, a hired hitman. Widening the investigation, police discovered that in the weeks before Shelby's death, this same man had reached out to other sex workers in the Houston area. All of them shared Shelby's general profile: blonde, petite, and vulnerable. That raised an even more terrifying possibility: a serial predator deliberately stalking women who resembled one another. But if so, why no similar murders surfaced afterward? Other theories emerged. Some believed Shelby had been targeted not randomly, but as a message, possibly to intimidate Marcus or others in the local sex trade. Others whispered that she may have been feeding information to law enforcement after her prior arrests, which would have put a massive target on her back if anyone found out. If that was true, then the man on camera wasn't just a client, he was an executioner. But the most devastating blow to the investigation didn't come from the killer. It came from within. After the police finished their initial sweep, Shelby's sister Christina took on the unbearable task of cleaning the apartment. In the process, she noticed the doormat outside her sister's door. Under better lighting, she saw what looked like a reddish stain. Convinced it was blood, she called detectives. Their response: it was too late to submit it as evidence. Christina took the mat home, and the more she examined it, the more certain she became. If it had been tested, it could have carried the killer's DNA. That mistake was more than negligence. To Christina, it was betrayal. Her sister had been killed by a man who moved like a shadow, and now the police had allowed the only tangible clue to slip through their fingers. As the weeks turned to months, the case grew colder. The footage replayed endlessly in investigators' minds. The man walking in, the man walking out. But the questions remained unanswered. Who was he? Why Shelby? And how could someone so visible on tape vanish so completely from the world? When the crime scene tape came down, and the detectives packed up their evidence bags, what remained was the unbearable silence of grief. And it fell hardest on Christina Shelby's older sister. She had spent her whole life protecting Shelby, first from abusive foster homes, then from the chaos of their broken family. But in the end, she was left with a mop and rag scrubbing her sister's blood from the walls of an apartment that should have been a place of safety. That moment was more than trauma. It was humiliation, a wound layered over the loss itself. Because Christina knew the truth, investigators had left behind potential evidence. The doormat outside Shelby's door, stained with what looked like blood, had been ignored. When she called the police, desperate for them to test it, she was told it was too late. Standing there in her own home, staring at the red smear, Christina became convinced it was the killer's blood. A chance to catch him squandered by indifference. But the indignities didn't stop with law enforcement. In the days after Shelby's murder, whispers circulated she was an escort. Headlines framed her not as a victim, but as a sex worker slain. It was as if the world was saying she deserved less compassion, less justice. That stigma robbed her of humanity in the public eye. For many, Shelby became reduced to a label. Yet the reality of her life told another story. She was the girl who lost more than 100 pounds through sheer determination, who dreamed of standing in front of cameras, not as an object, but as a model. She was witty, loving, and protective of the few people she trusted. Becoming an escort wasn't her dream. It was a detour forced on her by circumstance, by manipulation, by the harsh economics of survival. Meanwhile, the figure of her killer loomed larger the more investigators pieced together his actions. He wasn't impulsive. He was precise. He chose his timing. He carried a burner phone, erased his trail, and walked away as if nothing had happened. This wasn't just murder, it was a statement. Whether he killed for money, for power, or for the thrill of control, his crime spoke of preparation and intent. Some suspected he was a serial predator, given that he had contacted multiple women, matching Shelby's appearance before the murder. Others argued he was a hired hitman, sent to eliminate Shelby either as a warning or to silence her if she had cooperated with police. Whatever the truth, his method left little doubt. Shelby had not been chosen at random. And there, trapped between a resilient sister and a faceless predator, was the tragedy of Shelby's legacy. Christina bore the heaviest burden. For her, justice had failed twice: once, when the system allowed Shelby to grow up unprotected, and again, when the system failed to deliver answers after her murder. She was left to fight a lonely battle, insisting that her sister not be remembered as just an escort, but as a young woman with dreams, flaws, courage, and heart. The deeper question hung over the case: where does the true crime lie? In the blade of the killer's knife, or in the apathy of a society that looked at Shelby's choices and judged her unworthy of outrage? For Christina, the answer was clear: both wounds cut equally deep. And it was that silence, that indifference, which allowed darkness to spread. A darkness thicker than night, in which the killer still walks free, while Shelby's family lives each day with the question that has no answer: why nearly 10 years have passed since that November night. The killer walked into an apartment building, walked back out 22 minutes later, and has never been forced to answer for what he did. The surveillance footage remains: his face, his posture, his sunglasses, but justice has never crossed his path. For the killer, the sentence has been nothing. For those left behind, the sentence has been lifelong. Christina, who once acted as both sister and mother to Shelby, now carries the unbearable weight of believing she failed to protect her. She has described Shelby not just as family, but as her entire childhood, her entire life. That kind of grief does not fade. It carves itself into the bones. For the family, the pain is not only in losing Shelby, but in knowing that the images of her final moments still exist, replaying endlessly while the man who ended her life continues to walk free. They don't just want a conviction. They want truth. They want Shelby's name remembered with dignity, not dismissed, because of the path she was pulled into. So has justice truly been served? No, not yet. But hope remains, and that hope rests with us, with the community. Someone somewhere has seen this man. Someone knows the way he walks, the shape of his jaw, the sound of his voice. That person may hold the key. If they speak, the silence can finally be broken. This case is more than one young woman's tragedy. It is a reminder that killers don't vanish into thin air. They hide in plain sight, protected by our silence, our fear, or our apathy. But if we choose to speak, to share, to care, then even the most carefully hidden shadow can be dragged into the light. If you believe Shelby's killer should one day face justice, share her story. Because while justice may be delayed, it does not have to be denied.